Hello everyone, welcome to Bonnie Carolee Makes Cards. Today's card features Simon Says Stamps Center Cut Holiday Floral. This gorgeous stamp from the Make Merry release is embossed on an alcohol ink background. So let's get started. Because I am embossing, the panel has to be able to take some heat. I'm working on Canon glossy photo paper. I find that it can withstand some heat, although you do have to be careful, and the alcohol ink moves fairly nicely on it. The image has been stamped with Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. This ink is not affected by the alcohol that I will be using to move the inks. Although the image has been stamped on a 5x7 piece of photo paper, it will be trimmed down to an A2 size. Working on the larger paper gives me some flexibility in terms of centering the design. Although alcohol inks are difficult to control, I wanted to work on a stamped image so I could provide some distinction between the leaves and the poinsettias. Using Ranger inks, I tried to concentrate Wild Plum and Sunset Orange on the poinsettia and Meadow on the foliage. Starting from the stamped circle in the middle of the panel, I apply ink followed by some alcohol and use a straw to blow it out. I chose to use rubbing alcohol as opposed to the blending fluid just because it is much more cost effective. It does the job that I want it to do. It gets that alcohol ink moving. I like to apply it with an eyedropper. It just helps control the amount that goes onto your panel. I continue working around the panel, layering on the inks, thinning it with the alcohol until I'm happy with the result. Keeping in mind that we're working with just 3 colors, it is amazing to me the range of tones that is achieved. So here I go forgetting an important piece of information. When the image was stamped, the stamp was left in the stamping platform. When I was ready to do the embossing, I just made sure that the panel was oriented correctly. After the panel was completely dry, it was stamped with Versamark ink. I applied gold embossing powder. And now the fun part, the magic of the embossing powder, watching it come to life, and it is particularly dramatic on an alcohol inked background. As fun as this is, patience is important. You do need to take care as you are applying the heat. Embossing photo paper is quite different than working on cardstock. On cardstock, you can hold that heat on until the embossing powder melts. Not so with photo paper. If the heat is held in one place too long, the photo paper will bubble and literally burst. I'm working with the newer Wagner heat tool that has 2 heat settings. I started off with the lower setting, and that is definitely the safer way to go. I'm patient, but I'm not that patient, and I turned on the heat. I was also keeping in mind that a lot of people are probably working with heat tools with just the 1 heat setting. And so the key when you're working with high heat is to keep that heat tool moving. If you do get a bubble, immediately remove the heat from the panel. If that happens, you may be left with a very fine crack, but nothing that is really noticeable. I think I had 2 or 3 cracks in this panel. I just think it adds character and I don't worry about it. I actually embossed my panel twice. I just thought that the second embossing added a little bit more dimension and helped the image pop off the panel. A second layer of embossing powder always seems to melt a lot more quickly than the first. The second embossing does make a difference and leaves a nice puffy finish. I die cut a piece of scrap cardstock with the same die that I would be using to die cut the panel, just to get a sense of how I wanted to trim it out. I don't know about you, but I have had not so good experiences with trimming down larger panels, and once you've made the cut, it's too late. Framing it and visually losing the background that is unwanted gives me a better sense of what it will look like when I cut the panel. And now to work on the center of the panel. The first thing I did was have a look at the dies in the Hero Arts Infinity Circles to see if I could find a match for the circle stamp. Using the same technique as before, Green Meadow was blown on another piece of Canon photo paper. The sentiment was stamped with Versamark ink and embossed in gold. Again, care was taken when applying the heat. I kept that heat gun moving so that I wouldn't have any bubbling. Both the sentiment and some black sheet foam were cut with the circle die. They were stacked together with some white glue. I happen to have a die cut from My Favorite Things Merry Christmas circle frame sitting on my desk that I hadn't used. It happened to be the perfect size, so I inked it up with Versamark and embossed it in gold. I cut some black sheet foam using the same die that I used to cut the alcohol ink background. My Favorite Things stitched rectangle stacks too. I used the largest die. I find that some brands of foam will spread a bit when they go through the die cutting machine. That was the case here, and I did have to do some trimming after they were mounted together. I then adhered it to a card base of Neenah Classic Crest 110-pound cardstock. The circle Merry Christmas frame was attached, followed by the foam mounted sentiment. Gold confetti was used to highlight the berries and also the sentiment. They were finished off with Nouveau Morning Dew crystal drops. When the drops are completely dry, they are clear, leaving a jewel-like effect. And that wraps up this Christmas card with Simon Says Stamps Center Cut Holiday Floral, featuring heat embossing on an alcohol ink background. As always, I appreciate your visit.